When you're up against a hostile room of people who don't want to be there, you need real strategies that get results. Welcome to From Hostage to Hero, the show that gives you practical advice you can use right now in the courtroom, boardroom, or classroom. Learn how to move your unwilling audience to one that is invested in what you're saying, eager to participate, and engaged in the process. Learn from the attorney whisperer herself, your host, Sari Delamont.
Well, welcome everyone. Today is a very exciting day because I have a podcast guest, something I'm hoping to do a little bit more of this year and into next year. But today's guest is Roy Chang from Hawaii. So I definitely want to go there. And he is going to share with us an article that he wrote on some principles that match with the H2H philosophy and method. And it's very interesting and you're definitely going to want to listen to it. So welcome, Roy. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So tell me a little about who you are, how long you've been practicing, and kind of what's your focus down there in Hawaii?
Sure. Yeah, I've been doing the personal injury on the plaintiff side for over 43 years. And
43 years. How did
yeah,
I not even know that? Oh my gosh. I think you might have told me that, but it
yeah.
went over my head because you don't look like you've been practicing law for 43 years. Continue.
Oh, thank you. So I've always been kind of in search of, what's the best way to do our cases and how do we best represent the plaintiffs? And so that's sort of how I've been through the whole gamut of rules of the road. I've been to those seminars. I've also been to the reptile theory and I've been to those seminars. And then I thought I saw, it must have been an article and also watched your book. And when I read the article, I said, what's different? I think about the H2H. It's kind of what I sort of had believed inside, that jurors are really hostages. We have all been programmed, and I think Rob said it great this morning when he said that we have law school brains. And
Yes.
we carry that with us as practicing lawyers. So we always thought, in order to win our cases, we had to be better ourselves. We had to be better trial lawyers. We had to do these things and whatever. Rarely do we focus on what's going on inside the jurors' brains. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where I think the shift has come in, as far as my experience goes. Yeah, I think we really need to take a look at that. And when I heard about you and H2H, that's kind of where it all came together, that it was
Well,
really looking at what the jurors are doing.
as unique as you are, your experience isn't as unique, because so many people find me around, at least 20 plus years, if not 30 or more, and they have done all of the things. And you hit on exactly why I wrote the book, because when I first got into this field, and it wasn't even a field that I decided I was going to play in, I kind of got pulled into it, and now I love it. But I just started reading everything I could get my hands on, and so lucky that Rick Friedman was one of my first mentors. And that was the thing nobody was talking about. I'm like, wait a minute, what about the jurors? There was a lot about like, how do we influence them? And how do we, how do we make sure that they vote our way? But like, what's going on in their brain was the exact reason I wrote the book. And I'm so glad that it had that effect on you. And so you've been in the H2H crew. You mentioned that Rob, one of our other members, not that there's just two of you, but we were in a training together this morning. Actually, we're almost up to 250. I know you're not a founder, Roy, but you're pretty close
Uh-huh.
to being like close after we opened.
Right.
And so you're in the crew, which is where we play with all of these concepts. And so you had sent me an article, which is why we are podcasting today. And it's on the heliotropic effect, which is what the name of today's podcast is about, and how this is going to affect your cases. And I'll just start the article. And those of you listening, you all get a copy of this in the show notes. If you want to go and download it there at sariswears.com/podcast. I can't promise that will be on any of the actual streaming platforms, but we will have it on our website for sure. You can get a copy of this, but it starts out, Roy says, Sari once said, quote, jurors are biased for you, meaning because you stand on the side of the right, there is no impartiality that we want from jurors. There are no two sides to evil. We are on the right side, on the good side. Why would jurors be biased for us? Back to Roy. Is it because Sari says so? I say, duh. Or
Mhm.
is it because of a scientific principle, a basic idea or rule that explains or controls how something happens or works? My curiosity led me on a quest to find this quote unquote plaintiff principle. So tell us what the heliotropic effect is and why, as trial attorneys, we should care about this.
Sure. Let me go back to when I first heard you say that jurors are biased first, and that we're all on the side of the right. Win, lose, or draw, we're always on the side of the right. Those words really resonated with me, and it was sort of on the back of the brain all along. And then I happened to be reading a book by Kim Cameron. It's called The Positively Energizing Leadership. And he mentions for the first time I've ever heard of it, the heliotropic effect. I was, gosh, what is that? And so he explains that if we were to take a plant and put it in front of a window, the plant will always lean towards the sun. And that's
Mm,
because the sun is the life-giving energy for all living beings. But he also said it doesn't apply just to plants. It also applies to humans. And when I heard that, and then as I'm reading through his book, it came down to, could this be something that explains why they're biased for us? Is it something that's not just in the brain, but in every cell of the body, that we will always gravitate towards what is good, what is life-giving, and away from what is life-depleting and also what destroys life? And as plaintiffs' lawyers, we always say, "Hey, we're on the side of the good side, they're the dark side." And really, it starts
mhm.
to make sense. The light bulb goes off. Yeah, that's what we have to look at.
Well, you know what's so funny about that too is that you are one of many who've said to me, like either in a seminar or in a coaching session, went, stop, wait, say that again. Like,
Mhm.
and I think you know that. You just said we say it all the time. We say on the side of the right. We're on the, we're on the right side. They're on the bad side. But when I say it, it's almost like you guys are like, oh, it's like true. Like we really do stand on the side of the right. And so many of you have written to me and said that just so really just grounded me in the work that we do versus we're trying, it's us against them and it can go either way. It's like, no, no, no. There's only one right side here. But I would say also that this is pretty revolutionary because the very thing that, we're hoping jurors are, at least in the old system, is, unbiased and impartial. And as you know, Roy, I think that's not even a thing. I don't
Mhm.
know that that person exists in the world that can be like, I have no thoughts either way. I have no leanings either way. It just doesn't exist, I don't think. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. Going back again to the law school brain, we were programmed to think, well, jurors are against us. They're the
Mm-hmm.
bad side.
Yep.
And we kind of go with that. So our whole jury selection is based on kick out the bad guys, find the bad
Yep.
guys, kick them out. Never did I think about, well, really, is that true? We've been
Mm.
programmed because of tort reform, but is it really true? Um, and jurors that I've talked to, a lot of times they're just like us. They're no different than us. And so why can't we communicate in that realm that they're not bad guys? We just need to communicate with them. And it's really kind of interesting. Go
I
ahead.
think you just hit on something huge, though. I'm sorry to interrupt you because I think that's what it is. I
Mhm.
think you do believe you're on the side of the right. But until I came along, you didn't realize the jurors were too. I think that's what it was, is marrying those two things, saying you're on the side of the right. Therefore, most of the jurors, if not all of them,
Mhm.
are going to side with you because, again, of what we're talking today. Sorry, I
Mhm.
just had to grab
Yeah,
that because
no, no,
that made sense in my brain in that moment.
No, I think that's really true. And so when we start taking a look at, okay, so how do we use this? If it is really something that's more than just the brain, but actually goes down to every cell of the human body, and that's
Hmm.
what Kim Cameron talks about. He says the heliotropic effect is with every single cell of the human body. It's like with the sunflower. The sunflower rises with the sun, it follows the sun, and it sets with the sun, and then it reprograms itself to start all over again. Well, the human body does exactly the same thing. So yeah, if that's true, then how do we use that? How do we use a source of light to our best advantages? And of course, we've looked at the reptile theory. And reptile theory basically says it's the reptile brain. Well, yeah,
Hmm.
I can understand. And it was really kind of cool that David is now looking also at what's going on inside the jurors, as opposed to, hey, you just got to be a good trial lawyer. Look at
Wonder why he's doing that.
I don't know, yeah. Love David. He's a cool guy.
Yeah,
Um, but
very cool.
but I but I but the reptile brain is just more reactionary. The brain
Yes.
reacts to things. It doesn't make decisions. It doesn't have that gut feeling. And now the heliotropic effect does, because if it's in every cell of our body, then it's part of our DNA. And where do we get that DNA from? We got from our ancestors. And what did they learn? They learn how to survive. They learn how to be part of a tribe. And they passed all that down to all of us. And I think that's where H2H has really opened the door to that's where we have to play.
Yeah, because so interesting, because and you're talking about the reptile brain, and that was huge, what, 20
Mhm.
years ago or whatnot. And there's great stuff in there, don't get me wrong, but you said the reptile brain is only interested in three things. Can I eat it?
Mm.
Will it eat me? And can I fuck it? It doesn't care about choosing one side or the other. And it's funny, I was reading a book the other night too. I can't remember the name of it because I just started it. But he was also talking about how the reptile brain, and like you're walking across the crosswalk, and it notices the cars before you can even cognitively think about it, and creates all of the fight or flight that then gets you to move quickly out of the way. And so there is, and what I assume that whole line of thinking was attempting to do is, look, there's this fear response that, as you say, is in our DNA. And so let's use that to scare the jurors into bringing a verdict for our favor. But as you say, that's not really where those decisions are being made. Tell us a little bit more about that. I loved this research study that you talked about with the mice and the cherries.
Sure. Yeah. So I was always kind of curious, is there something in the cells of our body that's deals with fear? If we're part of our ancestors, then there's got to be that. And so I kept looking for different articles about that, and I found this interesting study. It was done in 2013 at Emory University by researchers Kerry Ressler and Brian Diaz. And what they did is they took mice and they introduced the smell of cherries to these mice, and at the same time they would give them an electric shock. So over time, of course, the mice became afraid of the smell of cherries, so which is cool. We expected that. But what they didn't expect was, well, how would it affect their children? Would they have the same fear? So when the children were born and they started giving them the smell of the cherries, they also had the same fear, even though they were never shocked. And then they went to the grand mice, and the grand mice also had the same fear, even though they were never shocked. But most fascinating
Fascinating.
was they took one of those that they had shocked and did an in vitro fertilization, and the in vitro little mice were also afraid of the small cherries.
Wow.
So there's got
Wow.
to be some kind of a quote unquote fear gene that's been passed on.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's imprinted. Well, if that's true, then why not just do the reptile and go in and find out our rats and kill them before they kill us? If we
Mhm.
have this fear gene, which I believe we do, I talk a lot about, our brains are wired for fear, and that's, they want to keep us safe. That's how they're wired.
Right.
So why not use that fear in trial and play with that and have that be the motivator?
Right. I think it is, and we do need to play with it. But I think as you've told us many times, it's all about sequencing. When
Mm,
do we use it? Because I think you said it today that jurors haven't heard the story yet. They haven't heard the story of what the defendant did or what the plaintiff did. To them, it's new.
it
Well,
is
that
new.
really, put the light bulb on in me, and to the point where, yeah, when we start a trial, the jurors don't know who to fear. They don't know who's
Mm,
they don't know who's good side or the light side. The only
mm.
advantage we have is we start first.
We get to go first.
You
Yes.
get
And we often screw that opportunity because we come in, as you know, and you've practiced 43 years, you've seen it all, right? We come in with, all right, this case is about money. Who can't give money? Or, we come in with a defense point, right? This case involves, uh, whatever, something the defense is going to bring up. And what do you guys think about that? And right, we put front and center a defense point. And yes, we're going to use fear, not to manipulate. We'll show you all how that you are listening right now. I will show you how in a minute, but we do use it, but yeah, not straight and front and center to like see who's here against us, kill them off, and then just accept whoever's left. Yes.
yes, yes. And it all starts with voir dire. And the reason I love the H2H voir dire is because of the funnels. It's not
Mm,
a danger funnel. And the great thing about the danger funnel is we first ask that question, who here has ever had the experience? So what
mm-hmm.
have we just done? We've now made it personal. We've made it
Yes.
personal to them. And now
Mm-hmm.
their survival brain or genes start kicking in and says, well, there's something I better listen to here because this might be helpful to me. It might save my family or my life or my children. So that's where I think we start. And you start at the right place with the experience
Yes.
and then going into the fear.
Well, and that's the great thing too, is because when you were saying that, we start with the who here is ever, we make it personal, but we also make it universal.
Mhm,
Right. So that again is such a philosophy and a foundation for the H2H method, is that most people on your jury pool will have had this experience. And most people, and if they haven't, you need to pick a different experience.
mm,
And most people will say that it can be avoided. I mean, I think that's the other thing with sequencing, and what I did a podcast on last month or so, which is, how do you combat the shit happens defense? And as you just mentioned, and I mentioned it again this morning in the H2H crew training, is it hasn't happened yet to the jurors. So if we teach first, here's this way to avoid it, and then we tell them, and here's what they chose to do,
mhm,
then it absolutely reverses that effect. But the same can be said in jury selection. I think we are often, as you guys start in law school, thinking that the jury's the problem, they're the enemy, they're going to have defensive attribution, they're going to blame my plaintiff. And instead of looking for ways to try to get around that, I've always said, let's work with it. If
mhm,
they are going to try to make this not happen, let's let them be smart. Tell us, how do you think this could be avoided? Right.
mhm. Right,
And
exactly.
that then solves our problem right away. So, those of you who are not familiar with the funnel, we start the funnel, and a funnel just means, how are we going to get the jury to tell us the
Mhm,
principle that we're driving to, instead of us telling them and then asking if they agree. So we always start with an experiential question, but the next question then is an expectation question,
mhm,
which is, okay, those of you who have shared the road with a semi truck, and maybe you've asked, what was like? Oh, it was scary. I didn't know if they were going to come in my lane. And, well, what's scary about that? Well, they could crush me. All the things. Well, what do you expect a trucking
mhm,
company to do to reduce
mhm,
those dangers? And right there, as we talked about last time in the expanding the method call, there may be some danger focused funnels and hope focused funnels. Well, really, in a funnel there's their hope piece right there. Right?
right,
Here's the way to avoid it. And what's so great about that is the jury's telling us instead of
yeah,
us telling them.
right. They
Right?
own it. Because they came
They
up
own
with
it now.
we didn't tell them. We didn't they came up with it themselves, and once they did, they own it. And that will carry on to when we start doing our opening statements. That was just, oh yeah, I know about that. Yeah, I told him that. I told him how to avoid it. So yeah, he's just saying what I said.
Well, and especially when the defense gets up and says, listen, this was unavoidable.
Mhm, right.
And now they're arguing not with you, the attorney, they're arguing with the jury, who just said, we just gave you a list of how this could be avoided, right? Now,
Right.
we're not asking necessarily that question of how could this be avoided? We're like, what would your expectations be? What
Mhm,
would you hope would
right.
happen?
Mhm,
Because it's so funny. We've had that question backfire on us in a couple ways. One is that this is becoming so popular that people are now writing motions about the expectation questions, which I guess that means I've made it. But two, lots of times we'll ask jurors, I've seen this in our mock juries, we'll say, well, how many of you guys got here in a car today? Everybody, and what are your expectations of other drivers? And what they'll say is, nothing. They're terrible. They're going to crash into me. Right. And so we've had to change the question to hope in some of those
mhm,
cases. What do you hope other drivers do on the road? Oh, I'd hope they follow the rules. I'd hope they do this. And then the winning question, what could happen if they
yeah,
don't?
right.
And
Yeah.
that really brings us back to the fear, right? So there's this fear in the air. There's this thing that could avoid it. But if we don't have that thing, this is the result with the what could
Mhm,
happen if question.
right. Yeah.
So, how do you think that all fits in within this heliotropic effect?
Mhm. Well, if that well, what I think the heliotropic effect is, it's really these fear genes that are trying to protect us. They're there.
Hmm.
And so we will gravitate to that which is going to give us the hope that you talked about, but
Yes.
also
Yes.
against the side that's trying to take away that. They want to try to take away parts of our life. So when the defendants injure somebody, it's more than just the physical injury. They start taking away things from their life, their
Mhm.
enjoyment of life, their hope for the future, the hope for their families. And when they kill somebody, they take it all away. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, where now the jurors can really see, oh, okay, that really is the dark side. They're the ones who are really doing this to people, and we need to stop that. And I think that's where it ultimately gets to hopefully the right verdict.
So what do you say then to people who are like, wait a minute? And you've seen it because you've been around in the crew long enough that when our new people come in, they're really like, what? What are we doing? This doesn't make any. Well, when do we find our badgers? And why aren't we asking these questions, that will go and find our rats? And this is too woo woo. And you're trying to build a group. And, but then all these quote unquote badgers are going to sneak on to your jury. I mean, what would you say to that? Having been in this for now a couple years.
I would say that there could always be a juror like that. And usually they'll pop their heads up at some point in time. But if we start with the premise that everybody has a fear, and the fear is that somebody out there is going to hurt me or my family, then I don't care what, they're all going to have that same thing. That same common shared experience is going to be, we don't want anybody hurting us. And once they
Hmm.
start seeing that these are the people that hurt us, then all of a sudden, I think they shift to our side. I also put one more thing in this article about um, if it's in the Bible, then Sari is absolutely correct. And it is. It is. It's actually in the Bible. And there was one passage that I happened to find. It's the John 3. We're familiar with John 3:16, for God so loved the world. But this is the
Right.
verse that comes right afterwards. And
Mm.
this is what the Bible says. And this is in the New International Version. This is the verdict.
The
Light
verdict.
the verdict, yeah, and that's what's used in the Bible. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. And that's when it sort of came to the light that what do defendants do? I mean, they have their evil deeds. If they can settle the
Mhm.
case, why do they sell it? Because they want to hide it. They don't want to
That's
bring
right.
the light. But when we have a trial, what are we doing? We're shining the light on their evil deeds because trials are public. Trials are open to anyone. Trials are makes
Hmm.
now become visible to everyone to see, including the jurors themselves. No more hiding this stuff. Now they get to see in front of them. And I think that's where they can see the evil, but they can also see our side, which is really the side of the truth. This is all we're asking. We're telling you this is the truth, and that's all we're asking you to find.
That's right. I love this because I think it's so it takes what the reptile started, right? Which is like, there's this fear that we all want to protect ourselves. And it adds kind of the savior, right? That like, and there's ways to avoid this. And there's light in
Mhm,
this dark place. Instead of this is all dark and everybody wants to kill you. And right. It's
mhm.
there is this lightness and this hope. And we start with that. And the sequencing, I think, is so huge here is that we're always starting with how can this be avoided? Okay, what if someone chooses not to take those steps? Result. Here's this danger. How can this be avoided? Okay, what if somebody chooses not to do that? Here's the result.
Right.
And after you play that through in voir dire and then in opening and continuing, it's very clear who the bad guy is. I love in your article all the
Mhm.
Star Wars references. It's the only sci-fi movies that I like. Um, but you talk about the DVAQ, which is the devil's advocate question. And so, what I thought was so interesting here is the idea that the snark really does kind of look like the bad guy, right? So, can you explain to our listeners what the
Sure.
DVAQ is?
Absolutely. So many times as we're going through our voir dire, we're trying to get the jurors to focus on these different kinds of principles and having them come up with how to avoid these things. We always at the same time have to be conscious of where's the defense going to come from.
Hmm.
How do we get the jurors to respond to that potential defense they're going to come with and solve it for us?
Yeah,
And
and
that's
without putting it front and center, without putting it front and center. Mhm.
And that's really the devil's advocate question. We do it, or HTH has us doing it in such a way that we're really imitating the evil side. So if we're talking about the
Mhm.
flesh, okay, let me make it really evil looking. And so we take the Emperor Palatine, and then we go ahead and do these kinds of things. So the jury says, nah, no, 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 we're not going to buy that, and let them
Yeah.
solve the problem for us.
That's right, right. So, for example, once we're down a funnel, we never do it before then, and once we have group agreement, yeah, trucking companies should train their drivers or shouldn't have them out on the road beyond these. I have trucking on the brain today, apparently, right? Then we say, yeah, but can they really train for, this type of crash happening, or can training really prevent this from happening? And we use that snarky tone, and then the jurors are like, yes, right, because they've already owned the good principle that when we throw in this snarky evil principle, then they reject it, right? Which is where again sequencing comes in. If we start with that, right? Who here thinks that you can't train all crashes away, which you can obviously, but you know, everyone's going to raise their hand. But if you do it in the right sequencing, it's just like a beautiful, beautiful thing happens. Well, anything else we need to know about the heliotropic effect?
Well, there is one other thing besides the fear gene. I also started doing some research and found that they're doing some research at Cambridge University that not only do we have a fear gene, we also have an empathy gene. So again, that's
Oh
the
yeah.
other side, the light side, the
Hmm.
hope side. And so how did we come up with this empathy gene? What did our ancestors do? Well, the only way they were able to survive was as a tribe, working together,
Hmm.
taking care of those who are injured, taking care of the elderly, taking care of the children. So they developed part of the social interaction the empathy, feeling, because you can't take care of somebody else if you don't feel anything for them. So you have to
Right.
feel something for them to want to take care of them. And great from the Cambridge research, that's in us too. We have
Hmm.
empathy genes at the same time. So then, how do we use H2H to really awaken the empathy gene? And again, your sequencing is absolutely right. We can't do that until we have all the bad stuff and the bad guys talked about first. And now, how do we take care of what they did? How do we help the injured person? How can money help that injured person? Now the
Hmm.
empathy starts to make sense. So, okay, you heard one of our tribes. Well, I don't like that. So I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to make sure you are held accountable for injuring somebody in our tribe. And I think that's where empathy comes into play.
And we had that beautiful conversation about price versus value, and another devil's advocate, a lighter one, but there is, yeah, but they died. What can money do? Like in a death case. And the jurors would just roar back, it can do this, it can do that. And they solve all of our problems. People come to me all the time and say, sorry, I heard you say that 1,000 times, but you're right. They will solve all of our problems. And I think, I was just talking to one of our coaches this week about, some of the new crewbies coming into the crew and how they're so struggling with this, you know, exclusionary voir dire that you've all been trained in, and the H2H method, which I wouldn't go as far as to say it's inclusionary. It's really walking through a different door. And what I was saying to the coaches, I said, the first thing that you need to do is, this is a different system altogether. You're not going to be able to mold them together and be like, okay, how does that work with what I already know? It may later, but at first you just need to throw that idea out. We're trying to do something different here. Now, while we're doing this different thing, our badgers are going to show up. We'll take care of them. There's just, we're doing that in a different way. We're still have very similar end result, but there's so much more benefit here, right? We don't just get rid of badgers. We also form our group and all of the things. But it's really a philosophy shift and mindset, right? Of
Exactly.
this is so different than how I've been trained. And I have a lot of empathy for that when you've done it for 30, 40 years, and then some chick comes and tells you, hey, try this. That can be really frightening. Absolutely. Did you experience that when you first came into H2H?
Yeah, in a lot of respects, it was like, hmm, how does some non-lawyer person tell us how to do lawyering? You know, you got
Yeah.
to sanction that until you start to hear why you're suggesting that we do these kinds of things. Then all of a sudden things kind of fall into place, and then you kind of understand why we do what we do in the H2H method. And I think that's really, I think, quite brilliant as far as the strategies that we use. Again, matching to either the heliotropic effect or the genes that jurors have, it matches that. It supports,
Mhm.
as opposed to shooting in the dark and so on. We think it's the brain. Oh, we think it's this. No, there's a system that really works towards what's inside of every single juror. And then it helps us to then, in a sec, persuade them, or actually they're persuading themselves
That's
as
right.
to what to
That's
do.
right. Yeah, we're just showing them the truth. We're showing them the light. We're letting the light shine. And that's really all it takes. But getting there is oftentimes the issue because of our own stuff coming in. Well, but I need to talk about this and this and this and this. You're getting in the way. You're getting in the way. Let the light shine. And that will be enough. Where I'm going to end with a quote from your article, the ending quote, which says, "In this epic battle between good and evil, light versus dark, we may not have a silver bullet, but we do have a lightsaber. It's in every juror's DNA. It's the side of the force that's more powerful. As Sari says, we are on the good side, the side of the right, the light, the truth." Well, thank you so much for being here today, but also being in the crew. We just enjoy having you, and you need to have your state association of justice have me come because I want to come to one and
Well,
talk with all of you. Thanks so much for being
well,
here.
thanks, Laurie. Appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. We'll talk soon, everybody.
Okay,
Thanks so
sounds good.
much. Have you ever wished that you knew what the jury was thinking? Well, grab a pen and paper because I'm about to give you instant access to a free training I created for plaintiff trial attorneys called 3 Powerful Strategies to Help You Read a Juror's Mind. It's going to help you to understand what the jury is thinking so you'll feel confident to trust them and yourself in the courtroom. Ready for the address? Go to sariswears.com/jury. Enjoy!